Hi, everyone. PC here, and welcome to the February edition of Concert Artistry. Tonight, we're privileged to have a conversation with one of the most brilliant and creative musical minds of this generation. Professor of Composition, USC Thornton School of Music, Frank Ticheli's compositions have been performed worldwide, and they've been recognized with many accolades. Most recently, Lux Perpetua was recognized as a 2021 winner of the prestigious NBA William D. Ravelli Prize, and you've probably won several more recognitions since then. He's composed for so many genres, but most important for music educators is the amazing amount of quality pieces for wind band at all levels, from a level 1 piece that young musicians can enjoy to the ultimate sophistication of a level, 32 piece. Frank Ticheli's music has enriched our wind band literature beyond measure. One of his many innovations are the extensive performance notes that he includes in many of his scores. And Frank, I know this 20-minute Zoom can only scratch the surface of an aspect that's crucial for conductors to attain concert artistry, but we're so grateful for you for sharing your time. And so I'll just turn it over to you. We're on with bated breath, waiting to see your music through the eyes of the composer.
Thank you, Paula. And I didn't know you go by that name, that moniker PC.
It doesn't stand for politically correct.
Right. So FT here, everyone. And thank you for letting me, allowing me a chance to talk a bit about score study and interpretation. I really appreciate it, Paula. It's an important topic, certainly. For me as a composer, I get excited when conductors can show me another correct point of view regarding my own music. I love when that happens. Not necessarily better or less well, just another valid interpretation. It reminds me, and it reminds us all, that this is a living thing, that the score is this kind of living thing. Just to quote Copland, he once said the score is just an approximation. As beautiful as it may look, and as much as we are taught to revere the score, it's still just this human-made thing and an approximation, because we're all fallible as human beings. And he says, beyond that, you're on your own. Now, it's a close approximation, no question about it, but an approximation nonetheless. And so I just think it's very important to understand that when we have a score in front of us, that we are not just obeying instructions on the score, but we are constantly asking ourselves, what are the intentions behind those marks on the score, those symbols on the score? I think that's a really important thing. Each of us, as conductors, each conductor carries a unique inner light, if you will, our own sort of custom-made lantern that can shed light, unique light, on a piece of music in a way that no one else can. And that's something we can't forget. It's a lantern that is worth shining. And when we recognize our own light, our own uniqueness, we become empowered to shine that. So I think it's a really important thing to remember, that because each of us is unique, we bring something to a piece of music that no one else can. Not in quite the same way. And that's something that I think we have to celebrate. And we have to remind ourselves of. So that's something I wanted to start with. How we study scores, there are so many different ways to study scores. Some conductors love to go from sort of the general to specific, and other conductors go just the opposite. They go specific to general. I remember seeing on television several years ago, there was an interview of Schulte, and it was a Lutoslawski, and I've forgotten which piece. It was a work that they had commissioned, Chicago Symphony had commissioned by Lutoslawski. And the interviewer asked Schulte, how do you study a score like this? It's so complex and it's brand new and no one's ever performed it. So no one knows exactly what the score sounds like. How do you study it? And for Schulte, this is really interesting. He said, I like to start on page 1, and I don't go on to page 2 until I've fully learned page 1. And so for me, to me, that doesn't work for me, because my brain works differently. I need to sort of go through get a general form of a piece first, with a sort of thumbing through the score, and get the sort of broad formal pillars, And then I go at a more of a middle ground level and I get the phrase structure. Phrase structure is so important to me. That helps me memorize a piece. It helps me internalize, a better word than memorize. I internalize a piece when I can break it down into phrases. It also helps me. I mean, when we get overwhelmed by just the hugeness of a project, we sometimes just stop before we've even started. We'll sort of sabotage it and just sort of stop in our tracks because, oh, it's just too overwhelming. But when I can break it into phrase structure, that's looking at the smaller step-by-step procedure of understanding the overall form. So for me, phrase structure is really important. So I do that early on. But Schulte, coming back to Schulte, he likes to do page 1, and he doesn't go on to page 2 until he's fully learned page 1. My friend, Carl St. Clair, conductor of the Pacific Symphony, he's even more radical than that. He learns measure 1, and then he goes to measure 2, and then he puts measure 1 and 2 together. Then he goes to measure 3, and then he puts measure 1, 2, and 3 together. So he builds it like that. It just reminds us that our brains are all unique. All of us, we process information in different ways. So the first thing I want to say is that you have to find out what works for you, what works better for you. And along the way, I'm sure many people watching this know everything I've said so far and have picked up their own strategies for studying scores. I know that some people, my colleague Alan McMurray and dear friend, loves to use color coding to show energy levels so that when things are, for example, getting faster or louder, he uses red. And when they are getting softer or quieter, he uses blue. And so I just have a page. Allow me to share my screen here, and I will just show you what I'm talking about. I think I can pull it up here. Yes. Can you see that, Paula?
Yes, very clear.
So I just scratched this very quickly right before our session. And I did it like in just 5 minutes. You can just see this diminuendos here are highlighted in blue. Crescendo hairpins are in red. Dynamics that are mezzo piano and softer are in blue. Dynamics mezzo forte and louder are in red. Just something as simple as that. What that does for Alan, and I wish he were here to explain it more accurately than I can, but for him, it's all about energy. It's about if the energy is increasing and intensifying, when he sees the red, he immediately knows this is an intense moment. And when he sees the blue, he knows immediately that the energy in some way is lessening, whether it's dynamic or tempo or a reduction in color. He'll use red and blue to sort of show those things. So that's one of 100 strategies, right, Paula, that conductors will use in their score study. Now, I personally don't do this. Why? Because for my brain, this is not necessary for me. It doesn't really work the same for me. But I know it works for many other conductors because I've seen them use this and rely upon it. So again, you have to find what works for you. So if I may, I'm going to also go to another example. Let me just close that up. Do I need to save that? Revert. And let me just pull up now. I'm going to pull up the Cajun Folk Songs here. This is my second movement of Cajun Folk Songs. And I'm just going to show you an example now of how a gifted conductor can show me aspects about my own music that I didn't even know existed. And in a way, what this gifted conductor did is he not only showed me things I didn't know existed, but he made my music more accurate and more, just more accurate in terms of my intentions, just more closely related to my intentions. I'm struggling for the right word here because, English language and music often don't quite jive. But this was Michael Haithcock, and he actually showed me ways that he was able to be more powerfully in kinship with my intentions. And I'd like to share this example. It's in the middle. It's sort of the little quiet oasis that happens in the middle of that second movement. The second movement is mostly just fast and dance-like, except for just a few bars that serve as the kind of quiet lyrical oasis. And Michael showed me, and this is many years ago, I mean, this is, I think 30 years ago, Paula, 25, 30 years ago. We were both really young. And he sort of showed me some things that he did in this little oasis. And in doing so, he was able to capture my intention far more powerfully than what I had written on the page. And my intentions were simple, that there'd just be this sort of oasis in the middle of the score. And so he thought, okay, oasis, how do we intensify that feeling of an oasis? So I'll play it for you first. And Paula, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Here we go. And here's the oasis here, right here. And then back to the fast music. And let me just pause that. Okay, so let me pull it up again. So again, now, so you see what I've got written here. The clarinets from the previous page, they're just soft and they're just tremoloing on an F concert and a C concert. And then the flutes are also tremoloing, but because they run out of air more quickly, I'm alternating them, right? The first flute, the second flute, but it's the same. It's the F concert. And then I've got this da, 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 this sort of lyrical version of my dance tune here. And I've got it in horns and tenor sax and euphonium. You know, if I'd done this again, I probably would have not doubled it up so much. I don't like the sound of the tenor sax with the horns. I probably would have used just the horns, perhaps, and maybe just one horn and one euphonium to get a little bit of a mixture. But I wouldn't have scored it in this way. So that's the first thing. But he already sort of, this is again 25, 30 years ago. He already was sort of in that same, sharing that same value. So here's a couple of things he did. Clarinets, first of all, he had them as quiet as possible. So they're way under. Flutes, because they're colors, because it's going from second flute to first flute, back to second, back to first, he put these little accents, like little forte pianos. So the second flute has, and then the first flute, just these little forte piano kinds of just these little points of color, like bell-like quality. And what's really cool about that is you get, like the first one at 88, you get on that rest. There's a rest in the horns, tenor sax, euphonium, and you get that little ping. And then again, the second flute at 90, they get a solo on that beat as well. So you actually hear the forte piano because there's no attack point happening in measures 88 and 90. Here, where my cursor is, and here. So those things. And then finally, because the clarinets are much softer and the flutes are doing these little forte pianos, it's delicate. He also reduced the number of instruments playing here. I don't remember how much, but drastically reduce it. And now when I do it, I even reduce the dynamic to like everything quiet, like pianissimo. So it's all so quiet. Now I could hear people, I could imagine people watching this saying, well, you're just rewriting the piece, so what? But no, it's more than that. It is intensifying what my intentions were. I was intending to have this dramatic contrast to the happy, festive, joyous, dance-like quality of the second movement. I wanted just the opposite of that. I wanted an oasis of calm, of quiet, something fragile and beautiful and intimate and personal. And so everything that Mike Hathcock did intensified those qualities. Those are my intentions: quiet, personal, intimate. So that's an example right there of how an interpreter can change things or get beyond things that are just on the notated page and yet end up being more accurate, more closely related to my intentions. So that's an example there. Okay, I will stop this one and go to another one.
And Frank, this makes such a great point because so many times conductors are afraid to do anything with the music. They're afraid to do anything that they don't see on the page, not realizing that that's only the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. And you have to also sort of play devil's advocate here, because you don't just change things all because I felt like it. It
No,
requires spending time with it, investing time so that you've absorbed the music and made it your own, so that when you make these kinds of decisions, they're informed. It's like, I believe in intuition, but informed intuition. That to me is the key, informed intuition. So this next example, this is just an example of a much less drastic kind of change that not even a change, but just a much less drastic example. This is my simple gifts. I think it's the first one that I wanted to talk about in the beginning. Yeah, right here at the beginning. You got this simple tune here. Bum ba dum ba da 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 dee da da dee dum ba dum ba da 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 dum ba da bum bum ba. So just that much only. Just those first few bars there. You can see that there's a melody. Of course, the melody's in the first clarinet, and accompanying it is the triangle down below, just giving this little punctuation, just this wonderful little bright crystalline quality that the triangle can provide. And then the flute is sort of, at first it looks like it's going to double, because for the first three bars it does. Bum, ba-da, but then it keeps doing it. Bum, ba-da, bum, ba-da, ba, ba, ba. So I start out having them double, but then the first flute goes its own way. Well, the reason I have the first flute repeat that is because that's this bird call. This first song is based on sorry about the phone, is based on a Shaker song about, and in the song there's this turtle dove, and its nature, its simplicity of nature, and there's literally a bird in the poem, and so this is sort of capturing the bird there, and so that's something important to remember right there. The flute, it's not just dotted quarter note to eighth note to half note with an accent. If you think about what's the reason for that accent. So this is important to me, because as conductors, what we do with our players, it's not enough just to instruct players, but we also have to always remind ourselves before anything comes out of our mouth, is what I'm about to say going to simply instruct, or is it also going to inspire? So I could instruct the first flute player here and the first clarinet and say, you just bring out the accent here. Da, ba, da, just say that, that's just instructing them, but that's not inspiring them very much. You tell them why we're bringing out that accent. There's a bird call here. Ba, ba, da, bee, ba, da. It's this sound that's a bird-like sound. That's why we're bringing out the accent. Or if there were dissonance, you could simply instruct your players, say, oh, bring out the dissonance there. Oboe 1 and 2, there's a dissonance, bring it out there. That's just instructing them. But think about that. How can you say that, give that same information to your oboist, your two oboists, but in a way that will also inspire them? So first of all, what kind of dissonance is it? Is it a humorous dissonance? Is it an angry dissonance? Is it a sad dissonance? Dissonance can be so many different things. So as soon as we share with the players what kind of dissonance, then they understand why they are bringing out the dissonance, rather than just being told to bring out the dissonance. So I guess I'm kind of going a little bit beyond what you wanted to do here, which is score study.
no, this is exactly what I wanted.
Oh, good, because it has to do with also interpretation of the score. And so you are including your players in the interpretation. You're empowering them to think about, well, what does a bird sound like to me? How do I sound like a bird by bringing out this accent? They now get to play a part in that decision making. Or, okay, maybe you've told them, you've shared with them that the dissonance is a humorous dissonance. Well, now the players can think about, well, how do I bring out a dissonance in a way that enhances its humorous quality, rather than just I play it louder? So these are the reasons, and all of these things remind us of this fact that it's a living thing, and every interpreter is going to interpret it slightly differently. And so that's an example of that. One more thing I'd like to share, and that is My Amazing Grace. There's, I think, the beginning I wanted to share. I think this time I will play it first. No, I'll talk about it. first. Okay, so in the beginning, this is something where I have found that conductors do not even play what I've written on the page. There's one thing to get beyond what's on the page, but then you at least have to play what's on the page. Right at the beginning, it says poco rubato, and so often conductors just blow through that. And I actually have a recording here where it's pretty much that way, and I find it a little bit dull. And I'll play it for you so you can hear what I'm talking about. It's rubato. So if you play these quarter notes just metronomically, it's going to be a little bit dull, I find. So there's that. And then on this next page, as you're studying, if you're doing something like Amazing Grace, and you're studying the score, you might want to think about, well, here's the solo in the alto sax, and I see it's accompanied by flute and first flute, first clarinet, and a little bit down below there's glockenspiel and vibraphone, one player. Of course, why do I have one player do that instead of two players? Because one player can do left and right hand on that and do it right together. When you have two players, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get a flam, right? Because, I mean, of course, we can teach them how two players to do it together, but I scored it in one player to ensure that it's done without the flam. Although I will have to admit, sometimes when people do it with a flam, it sounds pretty good. So there you go. But anyway, so there's this melody here in the saxophone, and the accompaniment up here in the flute and the first clarinet. You could play it literally as it's marked here. Mezzo piano in the saxophone, it's the melody, so I'm bringing it out, and I've got piano in the first clarinet. I'm telling you that maybe first clarinet is slightly more important than first flute. Or maybe I'm worried that flute is going to overpower the clarinet. I don't know I don't remember now. I actually don't remember why I scored clarinet piano and flute pianissimo. So that's something I'm admitting to you. I don't remember why I did this. So again, you're on your own to deal with this. You could call me up and say, why'd you do it? And I'd have to say, I don't remember. You're on your own here. But I will say, if you play it just exactly like this, it's probably not doing it justice. That is, if you play it just mezzo piano, this melody, and don't have some ebb and flow with the dynamics, the way one would play a solo, especially one so beloved as Amazing Grace, this song we've all known all our life, then you're not doing it justice. You have to also allow room for interpretive dynamics, just subtle dynamics to happen, ebb and flow. And then even in the flute and the clarinet, even though they're accompanying, where might you bring them out? So for example, maybe the flute, you might bring it out a little bit where I see in measure 12, the first clarinet holds up on a half note, while the first flute moves with quarter notes. Maybe you would bring out that first flute right there, where it has the quarter notes. And then again in 13, where the first flute has eighth notes, you might bring that out. But then in 13, on the downbeat of 13, you might let the first clarinet come out, beats 2 and 3, that is. Why? Because da da, that's amazing. It's my perfect fourth motive. Maybe bring that out. Why would I bring that out? Well, because neither the soloist, the saxophone, nor the first flute are moving right now. They're just playing half notes. So it's they're opening a window. And if you can see me on the screen, I'm just like opening the window slightly for the first clarinet just to play those 2 notes right there and remind us of that motive. So it's these little decisions like this we think about as we're interpreting a piece of music. I didn't write I could have written all of that in, but to me, that would be overkill. That would be micromanaging the piece too much. I leave this to the conductor. Now, if a conductor doesn't bring that out in measure 13, does it suffer? Not necessarily, because another interpreter may decide that, I want to hear that half note between the flute and the saxophone right there, and I want the clarinet in the background. Maybe I want to hear that interval right there. That it's a 10th right there, right? The saxophone's on a concert E flat and the flute's on a G. Maybe I want to hear that 10th. The 10th can be a beautiful sound. So we have, my point is that you have to think about these things to make your decisions. So, okay, I've done this now, and I did promise I would play it. So let me go ahead and hit start. And it's beautiful, but it's all straight metronome. Until the retard. So the retard was lovely. There we go. The retard was lovely. But this first page here, whoops, I went too far. This first page here, it was also lovely. I just listened to it again. It's beautiful sound, the intonation, the tone quality is really beautiful as well. The suspended cymbal there is just this little shimmer. It's not overdone because it's just a mezzo piano, and we're just doing this little flowering. It's like a flower opening up. It's nothing more dramatic than that. So everything's done tastefully. The one thing that's missing for me is just that sense of flexibility, tempo flexibility, and you could do too much of that. I mean, if you do too much rubato, then it becomes silly. And I think in the beginning, and it's just a little bit of rubato that could add this sort of human beauty that we're after in the introduction. Anyway, that's another example there, and all of these are just examples of how a conductor goes beyond what's written on the page.
Well, and you also pointed to the fact that every measure, every note has a purpose if it's a good piece of music. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to balance it. But one thing that I hope that all of the directors picked up on, Frank, your vocabulary of descriptors is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it really helps because especially with younger kids, we have to take the known and apply it to the unknown. And I just wonder if your love of poetry and the fact that you're quite a reader has influenced that vocabulary.
Well, poetry and music are really closely related, right? They are both dealing with sound and time.
Mm-hmm.
A poet will tell you, a poem doesn't have to mean something specifically. It doesn't have to be about a specific thing. It's more about how it makes you feel and how it makes you think. And music is the same way. It doesn't have to be about some concrete thing like program music is, but it doesn't have to be. But if it makes you feel something and makes you think about something that you hadn't thought of before and makes you feel emotions that go beyond what words can express, then music is doing its job and poetry is doing its job. They both share that in common. So I'm glad you mentioned that because yes, they are so closely related.
Well, Frank, I wish we could spend, I know you don't wish we could spend hours, but I could spend hours just listening to you talk because I was not overstating when I said I think you're one of the most brilliant musical minds of this generation. And the music that you've provided for us, I mean, I've taken so much joy in playing your pieces, and I know everybody watching this feels the same way. So even though retirement is in your future, I know you're going to keep on writing great and inspirational pieces. So thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on your stellar career.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it.